Teacher humiliated black student in class. The next day, truth shocked everyone. She walked into class with nothing but hope in her heart, yet within moments, her teacher turned her into a public joke. Laughter filled the room, not because she was wrong, but because of her skin. A black girl humiliated before everyone, treated as if she did not belong. But the hidden truth about her identity would soon silence the entire school. It was supposed to be a fresh beginning, a quiet moment in a new school where nobody knew her name yet. For Amara, a 16-year-old black teenager, walking into that classroom felt like stepping onto a stage where every eye was already waiting to judge her. She carried herself with dignity, head slightly bowed, clutching her worn backpack close to her chest. She had always been told by her parents to stay humble, to never flash her wealth, and to let her character speak louder than her appearance. But in this school, none of that seemed to matter. The moment she stepped inside, the classroom atmosphere shifted. Whispers floated through the air, glances exchanged, muffled laughter erupting at her expense. Her skin, her hair, her quiet presence, all of it seemed to set her apart in a room where conformity was silently demanded. She walked to an empty seat, aware of the giggles behind her and the way the teacher's eyes followed her every step. Mr. Whitman, a strict and well-dressed man with a polished British accent, watched her with thinly veiled disdain. He had a reputation for being harsh on students who didn't fit his narrow expectations, and in that moment, Amara became his target. He introduced her to the class in a way that felt less like a welcome and more like a performance. His words carried a mocking undertone, emphasizing where she came from, exaggerating her accent when he repeated her name, and drawing laughter from the students who looked to him for approval. Amara sat still, her face blank, but inside her chest a storm brewed. She wasn't unfamiliar with this treatment. It had happened before in subtle ways. But to see a teacher, a figure of authority, encourage mockery rather than respect, cut deeper than she wanted to admit. She kept her eyes lowered, refusing to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her pain. The rest of the day dragged on, each class blending into the next, yet the sting of that first introduction lingered. At lunch, no one sat with her. She overheard students whispering about her clothes, her skin, her quietness. Some mimicked the teacher's mocking tone. It felt less like a school and more like a stage where she was the joke everyone came to laugh at. But what nobody knew, not even Mr. Whitman, was that Amara was not just any ordinary student. Her family carried a legacy unknown to the world around them. She was the daughter of a man whose influence and power reached far beyond the classroom walls. She had chosen this school because she wanted to live like an ordinary teenager, not as the heiress of a powerful family. She had begged her parents to let her blend in, to be normal, to escape the burden of wealth and recognition. That night she went home in silence, carrying the weight of humiliation on her shoulders. She didn't tell her parents what had happened. She didn't want them to storm into the school and expose the truth. Instead, she buried her pain, promising herself she would endure it, at least for now. But life has a way of turning cruelty into revelation, and the very teacher who humiliated her would soon discover just how wrong he had been. As the sun set that evening, Amara sat by her window, staring out at the city lights. Her heart was heavy, but her silence was not weakness. It was patience. And patience, as the next day would reveal, often carries the loudest voice. The next morning arrived with the same heaviness in Amara's heart. She rose early, moving through her small routines in silence. The mirror reflected her tired eyes, but she refused to let the sadness from yesterday break her. She chose the same simple clothes she always wore, not caring that they didn't match the flashy brands her classmates paraded in. She wasn't here to impress them. She was here to learn, to grow, and to prove to herself that she could endure. When she walked into the classroom, the atmosphere hadn't changed. The whispers began the moment she crossed the threshold. Some students smirked, others turned their heads away with exaggerated disinterest. The sting of isolation wrapped around her like a cold wind, reminding her that no matter what she did, she was already branded an outsider. Mr. Whitman, standing tall at the front, seemed to revel in the unspoken tension. He treated her with a peculiar sharpness, questioning her answers with a smirk, correcting her with unnecessary exaggeration, and using her as an example in ways that made the others laugh. It was a cruel performance, but to him it was entertainment masked as discipline. He believed he was teaching a lesson that she did not belong. Amara endured it all in silence. She took notes diligently, focused her eyes on the board, and refused to let her voice tremble even when humiliation burned in her chest. Yet behind her quiet demeanor, the room was alive with murmurs. Students whispered theories about who she was and where she came from. Some laughed at the idea that she might be poor. Others mocked her accent and skin tone. To them, she was just a shadow in the corner of the room, someone to ridicule because she was different. At lunch, she sat alone again, her tray untouched. She could feel the eyes around her, the pointing fingers, the stifled giggles. Her classmates treated her as if she were invisible until it was convenient to mock her. The cafeteria felt like an arena, and she was the silent fighter refusing to strike back. But in the distance, a shift was beginning. A few students, though silent, felt the cruelty too deeply to ignore. They watched her endure with dignity, never once lashing out or lowering herself to their level. Something about her silence, about her patience, carried a weight they couldn't explain. It planted a seed of doubt in their minds, a question of whether they had misjudged her completely. That evening, when Amara returned home, she again said nothing to her parents. She kept her pain to herself, journaling the day's events in the quiet of her room. Yet the pages of her notebook didn't hold anger. They held reflections, prayers, and a quiet strength. She wasn't waiting for revenge. She was waiting for the truth to reveal itself in its own time, and that truth was already on its way. For the very teacher who had made her humiliation public was about to encounter a revelation that would shake the foundation of his pride. Amara's identity, the one she had fought so hard to hide, was closer to being uncovered than she realized. As she drifted to sleep that night, her heart heavy yet unbroken, the whispers of today would soon be replaced by the gasps of tomorrow. The walls of the classroom that had echoed with laughter at her expense were about to hear something very different, the sound of shame falling upon those who had mocked her. The following day began like all the others, but there was something in the air that felt heavier, sharper. Amara walked into the classroom with the same quiet resolve, but the moment she entered, the students erupted into muffled laughter. This time it wasn't just whispers. It was bold, loud mockery. They had grown confident in their cruelty, emboldened by the teacher who had set the tone from the very beginning. Mr. Whitman stood at the front of the room, his sharp suit pressed and his polished shoes clicking against the floor. His eyes found Amara, and with a cold smirk, he welcomed her not with kindness, but with sarcasm. He spoke her name in the same exaggerated way as before, dragging it out until the classroom filled with laughter. He questioned her intelligence, mocking her answers as though she were incapable of keeping up. Every sentence he directed at her carried venom disguised as humor. The humiliation was relentless. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her pen, but her face betrayed nothing. She refused to give him or her classmates the satisfaction of seeing her cry. Inside, however, her heart ached with a deep, familiar wound, the kind that comes not from strangers, but from people who should know better. A teacher, a leader, a man trusted to guide young minds, had chosen to weaponize his power against her. As the class dragged on, the whispers turned into cruel laughter, echoing louder with every word Mr. Whitman spoke. Amara's patience, though vast, was wearing thin. She thought of her parents, of the lessons they had taught her about strength, dignity, and silence in the face of hate. But she also thought of the promise she had made to herself, to endure, to rise above, to never let hatred steal her grace. Yet something inside her shifted that day. It wasn't anger, it was resolve. She realized she didn't have to fight back with words or actions. The truth of who she was, the legacy she carried, would eventually come to light. And when it did, the same voices that mocked her would tremble in shame. By the end of the school day, the weight of ridicule followed her into the halls. Students passed her with smirks, some even bold enough to imitate her behind her back. But not everyone laughed. A small handful of classmates watched quietly, unease etched on their faces. They had begun to see the cruelty for what it was. The way she endured with quiet strength made them question everything. It was as if her silence spoke louder than their laughter. When Amara returned home that evening, her parents noticed her silence more than usual. Her father, a man of quiet authority, studied her face carefully. Though she said nothing, he could see the heaviness in her eyes. He didn't press her, but in his heart, he knew something was wrong. He also knew that the truth of their family's name could no longer remain hidden for much longer. Amara spent the night in her room again, writing in her notebook. Her words carried pain, but also an unshakable faith that everything would soon change. The humiliation she had endured was not the end of her story. It was only the beginning. What she didn't know was that the very next day, everything would begin to unravel. The whispers, the laughter, the cruel games, all of it would collide with a truth so powerful that no one, not even Mr. Whitman, could deny it. And as the sun set, casting its golden light through her window, Amara closed her eyes with a sense of calm. Tomorrow was coming. And tomorrow, the storm she had silently carried within her would finally break into the open. The morning light broke gently over the city, but within Amara's heart, the calm before the storm was fading. She walked to school with the same quiet steps, her head slightly bowed, her backpack clutched close. She had no idea that this day would mark the beginning of a transformation, not for her, but for everyone around her. When she entered the classroom, the routine cruelty unfolded again. The students chuckled as she took her seat, and Mr. Whitman's smirk widened as though he had been waiting for her. He called her name again, dragging the syllables until the room erupted in laughter. But this time, something was different. The laughter didn't sound the same. Some students hesitated, their eyes darting nervously as though they sensed a shift coming. As the lesson began, Mr. Whitman asked her to solve a problem on the board. He did not ask out of fairness, but to put her on display, to turn her into an object of ridicule once again. Amara stood slowly, her face calm, her hand steady. She walked to the front and solved the problem with quiet precision, her movements graceful, her answers correct. Still, he sneered, dismissing her effort in front of everyone, but the moment would not belong to him for long. During the lunch break, the school principal entered the classroom unexpectedly. With him was a distinguished man in a tailored suit, carrying an air of quiet authority. His presence silenced the chatter instantly. Whispers began to swirl. Who was he? Why was he here? Students exchanged confused glances while Mr. Whitman straightened his tie nervously. Though he still held his pride like a shield, the man's eyes scanned the room until they rested on Amara. In that instant, the silence deepened. Recognition spread among a few who knew his face. He was no ordinary visitor. He was a leader, a figure of immense influence, someone whose name carried weight far beyond the walls of the school. And he was Amara's father. The revelation spread like wildfire, moving from desk to desk, whispered in shocked voices. The girl they had mocked, humiliated, and treated as if she were nothing, was not only intelligent and resilient, but also the daughter of a man whose presence commanded respect everywhere he went. Suddenly their laughter seemed hollow, their jokes cruel, their whispers shameful. Mr. Whitman's face drained of color. The arrogance in his stance wavered as he realized the enormity of his mistake. The very student he had used as a prop for humiliation was connected to power far greater than anything he had imagined. His cruel words, his mocking tone, his deliberate attempts to belittle her, all of it now stood as a reflection of his own smallness. Amara remained seated, her expression calm, as though she had expected this moment all along. She had never needed to reveal who she was. She had never needed to defend herself with power. Her silence had been her strength, and now the truth was speaking louder than anything she could have ever said. The principal addressed the class briefly, his tone sharp, his disappointment evident. He made it clear that the school would not tolerate discrimination or cruelty, not from students and certainly not from teachers. Though his words were controlled, the message was undeniable. Change was coming. That day, as the whispers of shock spread through the halls, Amara walked with the same quiet dignity as always. She did not gloat. She did not celebrate. She carried herself as she always had, steady, patient, and strong. But for the first time, the laughter had stopped. The students who once mocked her now avoided her gaze. Their shame was louder than their cruelty had ever been, and for Mr. Whitman, the humiliation he had inflicted on her was now his own to bear. His authority was crumbling, his reputation hanging by a thread. He could feel it slipping away, and he knew the storm was only just beginning. The weight of truth hung heavily over the school. What had once been laughter and whispers was now silence and uneasy glances. Students who had mocked Amara the day before avoided her eyes, their pride replaced with guilt. They shuffled nervously in the hallways, their voices hushed whenever she passed by. The story of her father's arrival had spread like wildfire, and with it came a new awareness of how cruel they had been. But no one felt the shift more than Mr. Whitman. His once commanding presence at the front of the classroom had dimmed. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, now wavered, as though every word might betray the fear rising inside him. He had built his authority on mockery and intimidation, and now the foundation had cracked. The principal had called him into his office after the unexpected visit. Behind closed doors, the truth was laid bare. Parents had already begun to complain. Word had reached the school board, and whispers of his treatment of students had spread far beyond Amara's case. For years, he had hidden behind the mask of discipline, disguising cruelty as structure, but now the mask was slipping. His career was under scrutiny, and his pride was unraveling. Meanwhile, Amara continued to carry herself with the same quiet dignity. She did not flaunt the truth of who she was, nor did she revel in the shame now weighing on her teacher. Instead, she focused on her studies, her notebook filling with reflections on patience, justice, and the strange way life often exposed cruelty at the right time. Her silence was her strength, and it spoke louder now than ever before. The students, however, could not escape their guilt. They remembered the laughter, the way they had joined in without hesitation, the way they had treated her as less than human. Some of them whispered apologies in the shadows, but few were brave enough to speak to her directly. The shame was too raw, too fresh. For Mr. Whitman, the fall was swift. Rumors spread that he would be suspended, that his career might be over. He walked the halls with his head lowered, avoiding the same students he had once commanded so easily. His polished shoes no longer clicked with confidence. They shuffled with dread. The pride that had once fueled his cruelty was gone, replaced by a heavy awareness that he had been exposed. Yet Amara did not celebrate his downfall. She had no desire for revenge, no need to see him broken. What mattered to her was not his punishment, but the lesson his actions had left behind. She understood something that few her age could. Dignity is not given by others, and it cannot be taken away by cruelty. It is carried within, and it grows strongest when tested. But for Mr. Whitman, the lesson was far more painful. He began to realize that the very student he had mocked had shown more strength, intelligence, and grace than he had ever possessed. And as the school turned its eyes on him with judgment and disappointment, he was forced to confront the truth of who he really was, a man who had used his authority to hide his weakness. The days that followed were heavy with change. Students whispered less, teachers watched more carefully, and the halls felt different. Something had shifted in the school's very air, a reminder that cruelty always carries consequences, and truth always rises, no matter how long it takes. And as the week drew to a close, a decision was about to be announced that would seal Mr. Whitman's fate, and forever mark the way the school remembered his name. The week ended with an announcement that carried through the halls like a storm. The principal gathered the students in the auditorium, his voice steady but grave. He spoke about respect, dignity, and the responsibility that comes with power. He reminded them that schools are meant to nurture, not destroy, to build, not to break. And then, in clear words, he confirmed what many had already suspected. Mr. Whitman would no longer be teaching at the school. The decision was final. His career had unraveled, not because of one mistake, but because of a pattern of cruelty finally exposed. Parents had demanded accountability, the board had investigated, and the truth could no longer be hidden. For Mr. Whitman, it was the end of his authority, the end of the mask he had worn for so long. He left quietly, his pride broken, his name forever marked by the shame of his actions. For the students, the announcement brought silence. They sat in their seats, their hearts heavy, remembering the way they had joined in his cruelty. The laughter they once thought harmless now echoed in their minds like a haunting reminder of their own weakness. Some wept quietly, ashamed of the roles they had played. Others stared at the floor, unwilling to meet Amara's eyes. And Amara? She sat among them, calm and steady, her presence quiet yet unshakable. She had endured their mockery, their whispers, their laughter. She had carried her pain in silence, not seeking revenge, not demanding recognition, but simply waiting for truth to do its work. And now, as justice unfolded around her, she remained the same. She did not gloat. She did not rise to remind them of their cruelty. She simply existed, her dignity untouched, her strength undeniable. After the assembly, whispers followed her again, but this time they were different. They were whispers of admiration, of regret, of awe at the way she had carried herself. Students who once mocked her now looked at her with a quiet respect they couldn't fully explain. A few approached her, not with cruelty, but with tentative kindness. Some wanted to apologize, though words often faltered under the weight of guilt. Amara accepted their presence with grace. She did not need their apologies, but she welcomed their change. She understood that people often follow the loudest voice, even when it leads them into cruelty. And she knew that sometimes it takes a storm to wake people from their blindness. At home, her parents watched her with pride. They had always known the strength she carried, but seeing her endure, seeing her patience honored, filled them with a quiet joy. Her father, a man of great power, had not needed to raise his voice. His presence alone had revealed the truth. But it was Amara's dignity, her silence, her grace that had turned humiliation into victory. In the weeks that followed, the school changed. Teachers became more cautious with their words, students more aware of their actions. Amara, though still quiet, became a symbol of strength among her peers. She had shown them that worth is not determined by skin or accent or wealth. It is determined by resilience, by character, by the ability to rise above cruelty without letting it define you. Mr. Whitman was gone, his career in ruins, but his fall had left behind a lesson no one would forget. And for Amara, the girl once humiliated before her classmates, her story became one of quiet triumph. She had not sought revenge, yet justice had come. She had not demanded respect, yet dignity had crowned her all the same. And as the days passed, the laughter that once mocked her faded into silence, replaced by something far more powerful, respect, admiration, and the undeniable truth that the girl they had ridiculed was stronger than all of them combined. Her story was no longer one of humiliation. It was a story of justice, a story of patience, a story of dignity that no cruelty could ever take away. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments below.